Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast, episode number 615 for the 26th of July 2020. Happy birthday, Cordelia. Coming up on this week's show, we're going to kick off with a story about Paleo Pete Evans, the TV chef, and the man making a name for himself as a conspiracy theorist and someone you may remember was fined for selling fake COVID-19 cure machines, treatment machines, something bizarre like that. He's been discouraging people wearing masks in Melbourne. And right now, masks are mandatory in Melbourne. Masks are mandatory in Melbourne. So what has he said? We'll find out at the top of the show. Following that, it's an interesting little interlude. We have Susan Gerbic from Guerrilla Skepticism on Wikipedia and a host of other skeptics, including some podcasters. Now, Susan had a live psychic reading by phone, which was online, so we could all sort of eavesdrop. And after it was all over, we have a bit of a chat. We what's the word? The wash up, the debrief. There's another word I'm looking for. Anyway, we talk about Susan's psychic reading. And my goodness me, Susan Gerbic has been very active on the interwebs lately with lots of interviews, various skeptics from around the world. Then we have a story which we mentioned last week. The Australian skeptics have released a press statement and general information about the VAXXED Bus, which should be called the VAXXED Bus, touring Queensland at the moment. And we will read out some of the more, what's a polite way of saying it? Wacky, bizarre, crazy, loony conspiracy theories the organisers of this VAXXED Bus are into, and that's being polite. After that, it's Logical Fallacies with Michelle Bijkersma. This week, Michelle's going to be looking at the new True Scotsman. Oh, I'm going to get in trouble for that bad Scottish accent. The No True Scotsman. What is that logical fallacy all about? It's an interesting name. Find out a bit later on. Then some people lost in a rowboat from the future. People lost in a rowboat from the future. Find out a bit later on, and we're going to round off this week's episode with a reading from the Book of Tim. Tim Mendham, the Executive Officer of Australian Skeptics and editor of that fine journal, The Skeptic. Tim's going to be reading more interesting What Goes Round sections from The Skeptic magazine. Well, it's a bit of a wet weekend here in Sydney, Australia, but spring can't be too far away. Look out for those blossoms, but a few more weeks of winter won't go amiss. But now it's time for me to run downstairs and have something I haven't had for a long time. Chicken noodle soup. Yes, chicken noodle soup. Remember that? With some toast, you cut the toast up into sort of rectangles and you duck it into the chicken noodle soup. While I do that, I hope you enjoy The Skeptic Zone. This story comes to us from news.com.au, written by Stephanie Biddle. Pete Evans suggests followers should stop wearing face masks. Celebrity chef Pete Evans gave his Facebook followers advice on avoiding a $200 fine for not wearing a face mask before quickly deleting it. Pete Evans has removed controversial posts that suggested people in Victoria shouldn't wear face masks. Pointing out he's no legal expert, the celebrity chef shared some information passed on to him, saying he didn't know the validity of the claim. quote, "free legal advice to all Victorians," end quote, he said in the now deleted Facebook post. Quote, "Don't wear a mask? Get a $200 fine, then elect to have it determined in court. Every single one of you, 6.359 million Victorians, can challenge the fines in court. The Victorian government won't fight you in court. It's far too expensive for them to do so." Evans, who claims the pandemic is a hoax, also shared a series of memes to his Instagram stories appearing to make fun of the use of masks, which will be mandatory in Victoria and Mitchell Shire from midnight Wednesday. The former My Kitchen Rules star has been trending on Twitter this morning with people slamming his posts. In another post, he claimed there was fake news in Australia, with 7 News in Melbourne running a hospital clip that appeared to come from New York City in March. People on social media said Evans' claims were, quote, "stupid and reckless," end quote, and could, quote, "endanger lives and jeopardize the management of the outbreak," end quote. Late last month, Evans was slammed for an Instagram post suggesting the coronavirus pandemic was a hoax. As global cases reached 10.3 million and deaths surpassed the 500,000 mark, Evans shared a meme comparing a ferocious T-Rex from Jurassic Park to the cuddly children's entertainer Barney the dinosaur. Quote, "COVID according to the media, COVID in real life," end quote. Evans captured the pic with a love heart and a rainbow emoji. But even among his loyal Instagram followers, the post was met with a mixed response. Quote, "Thousands of people have died. Have some respect," end quote, wrote one person under the post. In March, he shared a link to a petition calling for Australians to stop being, quote, "medicated," end quote, by flu vaccinations after the government introduced new rules that stipulated visitors to aged care homes across Australia would need to have a flu jab to enter. And that story, once again, is by Stephanie Biddle, and I will link to that in this week's show notes. I sure do miss going to those skeptical meetings in pubs and cafes to hear talks and interact with my friends. Oh well.
I think I can help you with that.
Who the hell are you?
I'm your skeptical fairy godmother angel from the internet.
You're my skeptical... What?
Relax, Richard. I can make your wish come true.
What? You mean free beer?
No. The other wish.
Oh, really?
Yes! I have news of skeptical meetings and talks online.
Oh, yes, of course, yes.
Skeptics Cafe Online by the Vic Skeptics brings you live and interactive skeptical talks via Zoom. Anyone, anywhere in the world is welcome to join in on the third Monday of the month. Just check out the Skeptics Cafe page on Facebook to see when the next talk is and who will be presenting. Alternatively, see the Vic Skeptics website at vicskeptics.wordpress.com for details.
That sounds great. A skeptical god, fairy, angel, mother, person.
And there are similar skeptical online talks happening around the country and all over the world. All you need to do is search for them.
Wow. Now, just one more question.
Yes?
What about the beer?
Okay, all right. Well, just for you. I'll make it so you can go to the supermarket, buy whatever beer you like, and drink it while watching the talk online at home.
And they say miracles never happen.
And to think I gave up being the tooth fairy for this?
What?
Nothing. Goodbye.
I think we need to think. Here's Susan Gerbic.
Well, folks, I've just had a very interesting experience. I've been sitting here in Sydney, Australia, drinking my coffee and oh, hello. I'm seeing all sorts of crazy things on my screen. I've got a screen full of skeptics via Zoom, headed up by Susan Gerbic from Guerrilla Skepticism on Wikipedia. We've got Pontus Böckman from the European Skeptics podcast. There's Celestia Ward. We've got Kenny, Biddle, Leonard, and Wendy. And the list goes on. Susan Gerbic, we just all eavesdropped on a psychic reading that you had over the phone. How do you think it went?
I think she was a very naive, nice psychic who said she was a skeptic, and I think it was fascinating, but it felt like a normal reading. I didn't feel like this was anything unusual.
I think that was the impression people around the world were watching. Pontus, what did you think about it?
I think if it was anything unusual, it was Susan's reactions, because Susan was very careful not to give any feedback and confirm and lead the psychic. And that made it, obvious that there was nothing happening unless, if you don't feed the psychic, nothing is really happening.
Yeah, that was my impression too. And you had a lot of people with me eavesdropping in on the thing. Celestia Ward from Squaring the Strange, you were eavesdropping in too, weren't you?
Yes, and I was drawn to it because she had so many markers of the standard psychic pattern that wasn't necessarily like, I'm going to be a purposeful fraud. You could see her fooling herself at every stage. She had symbolic misrepresentation where I'm seeing an animal. Oh, well, the rabbit might not really symbolize a real rabbit. It could be just something else. There were so many perfect little typical, it's not a bad thing that this was a typical reading. I mean, it would have been great if it was like, if we suddenly discovered a real psychic through this phone call, but in its typicality, it was very revealing. This is a standard tour.
And the rest of the people who are watching, Leonard and Wendy. Well, Leonard, what was your impressions?
I thought Susan did a spectacular job of not helping the psychic. She was not rude, not nasty. She wasn't silent, but her reactions were incredibly devoid of meaning. The psychic would say something, and Susan would say, okay, not yes,
that's right.
Not no, not you got it right, not you got it wrong, but okay.
Oh, that's interesting, or words to that effect. Yes, I thought you did it very well indeed, Susan.
I thought Susan was very poised, and she was in control of herself and her own reactions. If it had been me, I have a lot of reasons for secretly, I'm a hardcore skeptic, and I secretly wish I could communicate with somebody who's died.
Oh yeah.
And I'm afraid even in the, in the midst of an experiment, I would break up. I wouldn't be able to control my own reactions. I thought Susan was spectacular, but boy, the psychics, the tricks that woman was employing, whether it was just something that she learned or by experience, or wishing to be a good psychic and learning all the cold reading tricks, she was good at what she was doing too.
She was, and I think if it was anybody else, she would have probably had a flying reason. Kenny Biddle, can I ask you? You are yet to watch the whole thing yourself, but have you had much experiences of observing psychic readings along your adventures?
Absolutely. I've learned a lot. I can credit Mark Edward and Susan for a lot of the stuff that I've learned over the years, because of the psychic stings that I've been involved with Susan and Mark. But I regularly attend psychic fairs and sit with sometimes dozens of psychics in one day. And I've learned over the years to do exactly what Susan does, curb my emotions. I am aware of my facial expressions. I'm aware of my head and make sure I do not nod up and down or side to side. I engaged the psychic. I usually say okay rather than yes or no. I just accept that what they're saying, I acknowledge it. That's pretty much it. And I have found that within, if I do like a 15 to 20 minute reading, it usually only lasts about 5 minutes. Because
you're not getting feedback.
Yeah,
I'd
feedback.
If I was a psychic, I'd kick you out too. I'm not getting anything. Next person.
Usually that's what happens. Half the time I get my money back. They actually give me my money back and tell me to go away. But yeah, it usually ends within 5 minutes because I don't give any feedback.
Right.
And if I think, Richard, I think you said it. As long as you don't feed the psychic, you don't get it. They can't read you.
They come up to dead ends all over the place. Susan, this was a fascinating hour for all of us to observe. Will this be available for everybody?
2 hours.
2 hours. Well,
2.5 hours now we're at. Oh my gosh. It's all going to be on my YouTube channel, About Time Presents.
Mm-hmm.
So if somebody wants to watch the full 2.5 hours, you're more than welcome to.
Well, look, folks, I'll put a link to that in this week's show notes. And if you've got the time, why don't you eavesdrop like the rest of us did live? You can eavesdrop sort of post the event. And it's a fascinating study in what we can call, with air quotes, a real psychic reading. So everybody who's allowed me to commandeer your Zoom meeting, Susan, thank you very much. And I look forward to the next one.
Thank you, Richard.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Richard.
Hi, this is Abhijit Chanda from New Delhi, India. I am the host of the Rationable podcast. Normally, it would be very difficult for me to attend conventions in Australia, but this year is different. Skepticon 2020, the Australian Skeptics National Convention, 23rd to the 25th of October, is an online convention. This means that people from all over the world can now take part from the comfort of their own living room. This year, Australian Skeptics celebrates their 36th consecutive annual convention, the world's longest-running skeptical event. The lineup of speakers covers medicine, space, reproducibility crisis, climate, human evolution, and science and skepticism, not to mention some of the best local and international podcasters and science communicators. It truly is a festival, exploring science, reason, and critical thinking. Skepticon 2020 tickets are on sale now. Early bird tickets are on sale for $30 concession and $50 general. And that's Australian dollars. So for you folks in the USA, it's about $20 concession and $35 general. What a bargain! Skepticon 2020 is also very excited to have longtime skeptic and anti-fluoridation mythbuster Dr. Michael Foley join the list of speakers. Opposition to water fluoridation has been around ever since its implementation in the 1940s, with opponents stating anything from impingement of rights to risk and even government mind control in their arguments. Dr. Michael Foley is a Brisbane dentist, a past president of the Australian Dental Association, and an advocate for water fluoridation and public health. He discusses the science and the conspiracies in his talk, Water Fluoridation, Gobs, Mobs, and Nut Jobs. With so much to look forward to, now is the time to book your early bird ticket. Just head to www.skepticon.org.au. That's www.skepticon.org.au. Oh, and don't forget to check out my podcast at berationable.com. And remember to be rationable. See you at Skepticon.
Call to action on anti-vaccination bus tour. Now this comes to us from the Australian Skeptics at skeptics.com.au, published on the 19th of July 2020. Australian skeptics have issued a warning and a call to action to the Australian media, medical professionals and local councils regarding the current anti-vaccination revival tour of rural and regional Australia. VAXXED Bus delivers COVID-19 conspiracies and bad advice. The so-called VAXXED Bus is currently touring Australia, spreading misinformation about vaccination at local revival-style meetings, often in regional venues owned or managed by local councils or schools. This big black bus carries the logo of the Australian Vaccination Risks Network, AVN, an organisation whose leaders have claimed COVID-19 is nothing more than a bad cold, encouraged people to take photos in hospitals to show that COVID-19 is not serious, discouraged face masks for COVID-19 and stated that temperature testing is crazy and stupid, likened vaccination to rape, claimed microchips could be injected into the population via vaccines, promoted the falsehood that contrails from aircraft, which they call chemtrails, are used to poison the population, spread the discredited falsehood that vaccines lead to autism, propagated the myth that sudden infant death syndrome and the fatal injuries suffered by some babies who were shaken to death are really the result of vaccines. With the recent resurgence of COVID-19 in parts of the country, now is not the time to have anyone spread disinformation about the pandemic or vaccine-preventable diseases. It is clear from their own statements that the organisers of this tour do not take the threat of COVID-19 seriously. In 2014, the New South Wales Healthcare Complaints Commission issued a public warning against this organisation, stating in part, "Warning. The Commission has established that AVN does not provide reliable information in relation to certain vaccines and vaccination more generally. The Commission considers that AVN's dissemination of misleading, misrepresented and incorrect information about vaccination engenders fear and alarm and is likely to detrimentally affect the clinical management or care of its readers." The Australian Skeptics notice goes on to say, medical professionals should be aware that the VAXXED bus may be visiting their area. This will mean that current and potential patients may be exposed to dangerous misinformation that can have deleterious, if not fatal, consequences. Anti-vaccine messages should be actively resisted, and we encourage local medical professionals to take a stand on the issue, either via local media, social media, or whatever public avenues exist in their area. Media. We advise the media to take great care when covering the VAXXED Bus and the Australian Vaccination Risks Network. They use the tactic of tell both sides of the story, also known as false balance, a misrepresentation that the ABC's Media Watch has covered with regard to this organisation in 2012. The media are advised to focus on the more bizarre conspiracy theories propagated, but are under no obligation to give this group the oxygen they seek. Local councils should consider very carefully the possible consequences of hiring out venues to this organisation, with parts of regional Australia recording a worrying low level of vaccination in a time of a global pandemic. Encouraging parents not to vaccinate their children is irresponsible. Then we have a series of quotes attached to this release. Quote, "We have one of the safest outcomes when it comes to preventable diseases in the world because of our strong immunization program, and anti-vaxxers should just butt out. Vaccination has saved lives. It's safe, it's effective, and anyone that tried to create any other discussion against it is really trying to harm the Australian public." End quote. Australian Medical Association President Dr. Tony Bartoni on Radio 2GB on the 20th of April 2020. Another one, quote, "There has been somewhat of an upsurge in paranoid and sort of unhinged behaviours," end quote. And that's from the AMA State President in South Australia, Dr. Chris Moy, ABC News, the 21st of May 2020. And another one, quote, "It is concerning that the reports that I have received are that some people believe that coronavirus is a conspiracy or that it won't impact on them," end quote. And that's from Victoria's Health Minister, Jenny Makakis, and that was on the 7 News, July 2020. Now it's important to note that accompanying every claim made in this release are references. So when we read, for example, that the organisers behind the tour claim that sudden infant death syndrome and shaken baby syndrome could be a result of vaccination, there is a reference. And in that case, the reference says, "Anti-vaxxers come up with their most abhorrent lie yet." Quote, "So, shaken baby syndrome again, like SIDS, is a wastebasket. It is a way of blaming the family for what may have been caused by the medical community," end quote. And that is to be found at www.mamamia.com.au/avn. But all the claims that I've mentioned in that release have a link, a reference, right on the page itself. So for more information, just head for skeptics.com.au. You can read that information sheet for yourself, and I encourage you to share that link around. In my state of New South Wales, we are on a knife's edge. We really are. The number of infections is creeping up a little bit, and it could creep up a lot more to become, again, a real spike in this pandemic. The people in Victoria are suffering high numbers of infections every day, at least for the past week. So as the paper says, the release says, with the recent upsurge of COVID-19 in parts of the country, now is not the time to have anyone spread disinformation about the pandemic or vaccine-preventable diseases. Now is not the time to have people cry and whinge and whine about wearing masks. Now is not the time to discourage people having their temperature tested. And we've all seen what happens when we start to relax, when we start to let our guard down, when we start to think everything's going to be fine and good. The damage to the economy is terrible, but that is insignificant to the damage to everyday people, you and me, the community, the Australian community, when it comes to this pandemic, with lives ended, people debilitated with this disease, and the effect will be far-reaching for years to come. Head to www.skeptics.com.au and you can read that information sheet for yourself.
The Earth is only 6,000 years old. That's what Answers in Genesis and the Creation Museum say, and how can a museum be wrong?
Isn't Dr. Oz just wonderful? I loved today's episode. It didn't talk down to his adoring audience of women at all.
Science has proved that the subatomic quantum realm is as real as it is counterintuitive and bizarre. Therefore, I can use it to support quantum healing and quantum consciousness. After all, how can journals like Aquarius Metaphysics be wrong?
Evolution is just a theory. After all, if we came from monkeys, then why are there still monkeys?
We all have friends and family who believe these things and much more. Well, if you're a rational thinker who is tired of arguing on social media and never getting anywhere, we have a solution for you.
Join the Guerrilla Skepticism and Wikipedia team, and we will teach you how to add reliable scientific and skeptical information to the world's #1 source of information, Wikipedia.
We write new articles and improve existing ones. We remove pseudoscience, paranormal, and alt-med claims, substituting the actual facts. And we operate in many languages.
We've already reached tens of millions of people searching for information, but as you can imagine, we can never do enough.
So please join us. All you need is a PC and the desire to help educate the planet. In fact, you'll be educating the world while you sleep.
Contact us at gsowteam@gmail.com. Guerrilla Skepticism. The time is now.
Music by purpleplanet.com.
Logical fallacies. What are logical fallacies, and why is it important that critical thinkers should know about them? A logical fallacy is an error we can make in reasoning, but it usually crops up when we are discussing or arguing our point of view. Some people might even knowingly use them to try and score cheap points in an argument due to intellectual laziness. They are traps we can fall into, but if we know what to look out for, we can spot them when they occur and stop ourselves from using them. This time we'll look at No True Scotsman.
This interesting sounding fallacy comes to us from the notion that all Scotsmen are brave, and if one turns out to be a coward, then he cannot really be a true Scotsman.
This fallacy can be used by your opponent to change the parameters of an argument to seem to save them from being wrong. It's a type of moving the goalposts fallacy, which we covered in an earlier episode.
An online video showing some of the tricks behind applied kinesiology had a skeptic pushing down on someone's arm at different angles to get different results. However, according to kinesiologists, this is not how real applied kinesiology is done at all.
Applied kinesiology is a modality that claims that ailments in the body can be diagnosed via muscle testing. It is considered to be a pseudoscience. The video referred to is real, made by Richard Saunders, and many of the unhappy comments on this video from applied kinesiologists use the No True Scotsman fallacy. See for yourself by looking up applied kinesiology, how it's done on YouTube. Then watch the countless other videos from applied kinesiologists themselves doing more or less the same sort of thing. Therefore, protesting that one example is not real kinesiology doesn't get the modality off the hook when it really is all a variation of the same basic practice.
So, the skeptics tested all these water diviners, huh? And they all failed? Well, either the test was wrong, or those diviners were just doing it wrong, or they weren't real diviners at all.
Once again, we have an example based on a real event. When water diviners fail tests conducted by the Australian Skeptics or similar organisations around the world, and by the way, that is 100% of the time so far, Other diviners or believers in divining will sometimes claim that the participants simply did not know what they were doing, as any real diviner would have passed the tests.
I'm sorry, but if you believe in a god or gods, then you are not a real skeptic.
Some people can get quite worked up if they find others in the skeptical movement also happen to have a religious faith. But for many skeptical groups, one's religion or lack thereof is simply not of great importance. They can still be skeptics. While many skeptics are atheists, the two movements are not synonymous. Sometimes it's easier to dismiss something or someone who does not live up to our ideals as not being really part of what makes those ideals important to us. As with many logical fallacies, this one revolves around us keeping our particular worldview safe from contradictory information. Knowing a logical fallacy when you hear one, and even knowing its name, is important when arguing your point of view. However, you may come across as arrogant and not get very far if you call it out by name to your opponent when you hear it being used. If your opponent calls you out for using one, it's time to stop and think about how you are making your case. Use your knowledge of logical fallacies wisely, and remember that even if your point of view is right and you know all the pitfalls in arguing your case, it doesn't always mean you'll win on the day. And as skeptics, we must also remember that we too can be wrong at times. I'm Michelle Bijkersma from the VAXXED Skeptics. Thanks for listening.
Have we sighted any land yet?
No, nothing. Just ocean as far as the eye can see.
According to our charts, we should have reached the Arctic ice shelf, 2 days ago.
Let me see that. Yes, looking at the compass, our heading, our speed, we should be about here, which places us 20 kilometers inland on the snow. I don't get it.
How old is the chart?
This chart was produced in 2021.
2021? You're using a 30-year-old chart?
So, a chart is a chart, right? It's not like the whole expanse of ice and snow can just disappear.
Have you been in a cave for the last few decades? Heard of global warming?
Global warming? Don't tell me you fall for that. You see, I don't trust the so-called mainstream media. And you remember that expression they used in the olden days, fake news? When it comes to so-called climate change, I do my own research. So what if it's a little warm out at the moment?
A little warm at 32 degrees Celsius at 7 p.m. Oh, okay. You go keep a lookout from the bow. I have some work to do.
Okay.
To the organizer. Really huge and amazing adventure tours, Propriety Limited, New Melbourne, Australia. Dear organizer, I am writing to you about the so-called travel buddy you paired me with on my do-it-yourself Arctic adventure and discovery tour by rowboat. Is it possible that your supercomputer, the MAGA 2020, has somehow made an error when matching us. I had a similar problem on my last outing with your organisation when I was matched with someone who refused to wear a face mask on our walking tour of the COVID 2030 wastelands. So, I really must question the wisdom of using the MAGA 2020. Yours, etc., etc. P.S. Also note the 5 litres of sunblock lotion we supplied for this trip ran out about 4 days ago.
Land ho!
About time.
Should there be palm trees here? And now, a reading from the Book of Tim with Tim Mendham.
Hi, my name's Tim Mendham. I'm editor of the Australian Skeptics magazine, The Skeptic, and executive officer for Australian Skeptics Inc. Today I'll be reading from the section of the magazine called What Goes Around, in which stories start at one place, go all the way around, and end up where they started. And this time I'll be looking at a piece that covers psychics, writers, psychologists, and imbibers. Starts off with the ideomotor effect. Now, the ideomotor effect is a psychological phenomenon wherein a subject makes motions unconsciously. As in reflexive responses to pain, the body sometimes reacts reflexively to ideas alone, without the person consciously deciding to take action. For instance, tears are produced by the body unconsciously in reaction to powerful emotions. Many subjects are unconvinced that their actions are originating solely from within themselves. Some have attributed this motion to paranormal or supernatural force. Examples of activity that have also been attributed to the effect of this phenomenon include dowsing, facilitated communication, Ouija boards, and automatic writing. Automatic writing, or psychography, is writing which the writer states to be produced from a subconscious and or spiritual source without conscious awareness of the content. George or Georgie Hyde-Lees, the wife of William Butler Yeats, the poet, claimed that she could write automatically. Psychology professor Theodore Flaunay investigated the claim by 19th century medium Helene Smith, whose real name was Catherine Muller, that she did automatic writing to convey messages from Mars in Martian language. Flaunay concluded that her Martian language had a strong resemblance to her native language of French, and that her automatic writing was romances of the subliminal imagination derived largely from forgotten sources, for example, books read as a child. He invented the term cryptomnesia to describe this phenomenon. Now, cryptomnesia occurs when a forgotten memory returns without it being recognised as such by the subject, who believes it is something new and original. It is a memory bias whereby a person may falsely recall generating a thought, an idea, a song, or a joke, not deliberately engaging in plagiarism, but rather experiencing a memory as if it were a new inspiration. It may be their own original but earlier idea, or something they have heard or read elsewhere. Carl Gustav Jung treated the subject in his thesis on the psychology and pathology of so-called occult phenomena, and in an article called Cryptomnesia. Nietzsche, Byron, Robert Louis Stevenson, Helen Keller, and even the Beatle George Harrison have all suffered cryptomnesia at some stage. Noted psychologist B.F. Skinner described his own experience of cryptomnesia, and he said, "One of the most disheartening experiences of old age is discovering a point you just made, so significant, so beautifully expressed, was made by you in something you published long ago." B.F. Skinner's full name was Boris Frederick Skinner, and he was an American behaviourist, author, inventor, social philosopher, poet, and professor of psychology at Harvard University from 1958 until his retirement in 1974. Skinner invented the operant conditioning chamber used in laboratory experiments to test for learned behaviour, as in rats pressing a button for food. In a June 2002 survey, Skinner was listed as the most influential psychologist of the 20th century. Throughout his career, Skinner insisted that psychology should be a scientific, empirically driven discipline, devoted to the collection of massive numbers of observations of behaviours and the stimuli that bring them about. He was named AHA Humanist of the Year in 1972, and in 1987 published A Humanist Alternative to Alcoholics Anonymous's 12 Steps. A different approach to alcoholism was promoted by William Benjamin Carpenter, an English physician, invertebrate zoologist, and physiologist. His most famous work is Use and Abuse of Alcoholic Liquors, which was one of the first books to promote the fact that alcoholism is a disease. Carpenter was instrumental in the early stages of the Unified University of London. His father was an important Unitarian preacher from whom Carpenter inherited a belief in the essential lawfulness of the creation, that natural causes were the explanation of the world as we find it. Carpenter is considered one of the founders of the modern theory of the adaptive unconscious, a set of mental processes influencing judgment and decision-making in a way that is inaccessible to introspective awareness. In 1852, he published a scientific paper on the means through which the Ouija board produced its results. In the paper, he explained his theory that muscular movement can be independent of conscious desires or emotions, and he coined the term ideomotor effect to explain it, which brings us back to where we started. And that's What Goes Around from the Skeptic, December 2011. And you can find all copies of The Skeptic available to download from our website skeptics.com.au for free.
Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone. And a big thank you, as ever, to my Patreons and PayPal supporters, and a big hello and welcome to the new Patreons just in the last week. It means an awful lot to me. It means the show keeps going. And it means people all around the world can continue to enjoy, I hope, continue to enjoy the Skeptic Zone. Now, if you enjoy the Skeptic Zone, if you think it gives you entertainment, information, a bit of a giggle every week, then why not consider becoming a Patreon supporter? Just head for skepticzone.tv and click the Patreon link. And while you're at skepticzone.tv, have a look at the show notes for this episode, and you will see I've added a link for Star Trek Continues. And why I have added that link is because last week on the show, last week's show, the previous episode, was dedicated to the memory of Grant Imahara, mostly known from Mythbusters, but some of you may not know. He also appeared as Mr. Sulu in Star Trek Continues, an excellent series in the spirit and the style of the original Star Trek episodes from the 60s. If you haven't seen Star Trek Continues and you're a fan of Grant Imahara or Star Trek, then I think you should check it out. I've watched it many times, and it's very well done and very enjoyable. Coming up on next week's show, find out next week, which probably means I haven't got anything lined up just yet. That's the way it goes. But for this week, this is Richard Saunders signing off from Sydney, Australia. You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for show notes, contacts, and to access the back catalogue of episodes going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone podcast on Twitter at Skeptic Zone, visit our Facebook page, or leave a review on iTunes. You can also support the Skeptic Zone via Patreon or PayPal. The Skeptic Zone podcast is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed on the Skeptic Zone are not necessarily those of Australian Skeptics or any other skeptical organisation. Hello to the people, the afterthoughts, the people who listen after the music. Let me adjust this level here. I've got... this is the part of the show where I get a die. In this case, 10-sided. Roll it 3 times and see if you can use your predicting power to predict. Or your lucky guess. Or however you wish to do it. Helping me today is Henrietta the cat. Henrietta? Do you want to say something to the Skeptic Zone fans? I think she just said meow. Hang on a second. Come on. Come here. Oh, what a lump. Yes? And a scratch? Now, would you like to play the dice game? Oh, you can play it on the floor. It's all right. So here we go. Roll the dice 3 times. 3 times. First roll is coming up. And the roll is 1. 1. Right. That's 1, Henny. Did you see that? Okay. Next roll. It's a Susan Gerbic, otherwise known as number 5. 1 and 5. Next one. What do you think it's going to be, Henny? She's not sure. Okay. And the last number is 1. Sort of symmetrical in a way. 1, 5, and 1. Did you get those, Henrietta? I see.
And you can find all copies of The Skeptic available to download from our website, skeptics.com.au, for free.
And you get a free parrot with every issue.
And you get a free parrot and some other birds with every issue. And you can help yourself to them. Thank you.
It's probably like me, you know, when you hear from day to day, you don't even hear them. But as soon as you start to record,
yeah,
I hear birds and planes and cats at the door.
I get you too.
You know.